Sky News studios in Melbourne, live. The Bolt Report. Now, Andrew Bolt.
Welcome to the show. Well, the green lobby is in a panic. The global warming alarmists are spinning like crazy because South Australia yesterday had a massive blackout. The whole state lost power after a storm knocked out transmission lines, including ones from Victoria, bringing in 1/3 of South Australia's power. Now, this is amazing. A modern Australian state without electricity, back to candles and kerosene lamps.
Last night, South Australia was the laughingstock of the nation because we didn't have power.
The question now, did South Australia go to black because it relies so much on wind power, 40% of its supplies? Did it have blackouts because it had phased out its reliable coal-fired generators, even blowing up the Playford power station just last year? Well, the Deputy Prime Minister today sure thought so.
Of course, in the middle of a storm, there's certain areas where wind power works. It works when wind is at a milder style. It doesn't work when there's no wind, and it doesn't work when there's excessive wind. And it obviously wasn't working too well last night because they had a blackout.
Now, the Prime Minister today didn't go that far, but he did also link South Australia's huge investment in wind power to these blackouts.
I regret to say that a number of the state Labor governments have, over the years, set priorities and renewable targets that are extremely aggressive, extremely unrealistic, and have paid little or no attention to energy security.
Now, that is a fair point, because think of this. By switching so much to wind power, South Australia now has the most expensive electricity in Australia. And yet yesterday showed it has almost the most unreliable electricity in Australia almost anywhere else. So, if you were thinking of investing in a new business, a factory, something that needs lots of electricity, would you even dream of investing in South Australia? Well, asked today how investors would now see his state, South Australian Premier Jay Weatherill had a very unconvincing answer.
I see this as South Australians being resilient and having the capacity to respond to what is a natural emergency.
A natural emergency. Well, that's all. Weatherill says the storm simply knocked over transmission lines and the power would have gone out, whether it was coal-fired or wind.
The weather event led to those transmission towers being bowled over, led to the lightning strike in the power station, and led to the interconnector being shut down. So there was a cascading effect across the network. That was a weather event.
And that is how Labor, the Greens, global warmists and those green energy carpetbaggers, always after your dollars, are spinning this. No, this disaster was not caused by the policies of global warming alarmists. No. It was caused instead by global warming itself, by an unprecedented storm.
What I'm not going to do is allow this government to blame renewable energy for cyclonic winds and for a superstorm.
It's an unprecedented weather event, the likes of which have not been seen.
We need more renewable energy to prevent storms like this from happening again in the future.
A superstorm, cyclonic winds. You know, come on, let's have a fact check here. In fact, most of the transmission towers that were knocked over were near Port Augusta, and the Bureau of Meteorology's data shows top wind gusts of just 87 kilometres an hour. Compare Queensland Cyclone Yasi 5 years ago to wind gusts of 280 kilometres an hour, and Queensland didn't go completely black. And as for these floods now in South Australia, well, the floods of 60 years ago were much worse, and so were earlier ones as well. So these storms, they're not unprecedented, they're not proof of global warming, and nor were they unpredictable. In fact, the Bureau of Meteorology warned 3 months ago that the Indian Ocean dipole had returned. Now, that is a completely natural change in ocean temperatures where cold water meets warm water. And this, we were told, would bring the huge rains that we now see. And get this, these are the rains that warming alarmists actually told us a decade ago wouldn't happen again because of global warming.
Even the rain that falls isn't actually going to fill our dams and our river systems.
So, what really did happen yesterday? We're not actually sure yet. And those who know best, like the South Australian government, they may not want to say. But here's a clue. Just last February, the Australian Energy Market Operator looked at South Australia and it warned South Australia now had so little of its own stable baseload power to synchronise with all that wind power that if supplies from Victoria failed, the system would have to shut down. And that may have happened yesterday, after the interconnector to Victoria was indeed damaged by the storm and shut down. But we're now told there were, in fact, so many transmission breakdowns yesterday, it probably wouldn't have mattered if South Australia had its own coal-fired generators or not. Is that true? That needs to be investigated. So, no wonder the green activists are in a panic. Their global warming predictions proved false. Their wind farms, expensive. And their power supply, a joke. There is only one reason South Australia relies so much on wind power. There is only one reason it has scrapped all its coal-fired stations. Because of the theory that global warming is heating the world so dangerously, we must stop burning coal, sending the emissions into the air. Coal is evil. Joining me is Brendan Pearson, Head of the Minerals Council. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
Good day, Andrew.
Now, is South Australia paying the price for getting rid of its baseload coal-fired power stations?
Well, we're not sure about this latest event. We'll wait and see until the inquiries are completed. But we do know this. This is the third time in the last 9 months that there have been events in South Australia that don't happen anywhere else. We do know that South Australia, at various times of the day, has 40% of its power from renewables, and some times of the day it has 1% of its power from renewables. And so that creates a system that is extremely hard to manage. It pushes strains on the rest of the system which no other state has to cope with. And they've shifted away from low cost, reliable fossil fuel power, including coal, and they're really on a gamble that 40% of your power, which might be 40% of the power at noon, but at 8 o'clock at night it could be 1%. And that's the gamble that and they were warned. They've been warned twice in the last 7 months that the sort of gamble that sort of stresses that this imposes on the rest of the system. And I'm hoping
yes, and of course
the inquiry will. The inquiry will see what happens, but this is not the first time that the strains of this system, of their system, have been evident in their power system.
Yes, and it makes them heavily dependent on that interconnector, and if it goes down, the whole system is thrown out, obviously. Now, those power stations I mentioned, we showed the footage of the Playford power station even being blown up. What made them close? What made them uncompetitive?
Well, I think for a while the people have been sort of thinking that you can shift from, and there's been a protracted campaign against coal power, gas power for a long time, and so I think we've undervalued energy security. I think we've had for a long time, stable power, and we've gotten complacent, and this shows that the risks that we face when we subordinate energy security and we subordinate reliability and we subordinate cost to other considerations. And I think the most important thing that will come out of today is the Prime Minister said the top priority must be energy security. And you know, in our case, you know, there are mine operations. There's, you know, the whole of South Australia, households have had a terrible 36 hours, and that's you know, in some cases a human tragedy. And so we've got to focus henceforth, I think, on ensuring that energy security becomes the most important priority for energy systems, because there is a transformation of energy systems underway, and that has got to guide our work over the next couple of years.
Oh, absolutely, because what investors overseas must make of Australia when they see that they can't even be guaranteed their power supplies is just, well, the damage is horrific. And listen, but the point is, of course, Brendan, that we've seen South Australia go down this route. Now Victoria's got a socialist left government there that is saying, well, we probably will close the Hazelwood power station, another coal-fired power station, responsible for 1/4 of Victoria's power supplies. I mean, should such a decision now be rethought?
Well, I mean, we've got to think about, if they're going to close Hazelwood, what do they replace it with? And you know, what is new in today's energy system is you can replace that with coal, with what is called high efficiency, low emissions coal that can deliver baseload power with 50% lower emissions. That's what they're doing in Japan, that's what they're doing in China, that's what they're doing in Germany. So we can have a renovated energy system, and we can have it with baseload power that delivers 24 hours a day.
But let's go back to the first principles why we're actually doing all this, Brendan. I mean, this demonisation of coal-fired power generators, portraying them as a threat to humanity, to our children's children, etc. Is that threat alleged from the coal-fired generators, is it real?
I think in some cases there's some of these plants that are coming to the end of their natural life, and so they will need to
That's
be
an economic argument
over the next 10 years. Yeah, and so, but our point is, don't move away from the reliable, the cost-effective, the 24-hour power to part-time power. People talk about, oh, we can get through this, we can replace baseload power, and we can move to battery storage. Well, I'll just tell you one thing. If you got every battery out of every phone, out of every car, out of every industrial use, out of every laptop in the world in 2014, and formed an energy storage system, it would provide 9 seconds of global energy power. So the notion that we have, the notion we have got renewable systems with battery storage that could replace something like the Hazelwood power system, the power generation, which, you know, 1/4 of Victoria's power, cheap power, is complete folly.
Now, I know that business groups don't like, or businesses generally do not like going where I'm trying to take you, so I'll only ask once more, and you can glide over it if you like. But the demonisation of coal-fired power stations is a threat to humanity. Your children are going to die from the heating planet because of them. Is that actually true?
No. Look, coal has been an indispensable part of Australia's economic development for the last 120 years. You know, it is one of the reasons. It's part of our comparative advantage as a country. You know, 10 years ago, Australia had the cheapest power in the OECD. Now we're number 27th. So, you know, coal and other fossil fuels, gas power as peaking power, has been at the absolute essence of our economic strength. And we shouldn't forget that, and we shouldn't forget that the energy security that it plays, not only for us, but for countries right throughout East Asia who have also supported our economic growth over the last 40 years in particular. Coal exports are our second largest export. Local generated coal power is indispensable and has been indispensable to our economic development.
Now, you mentioned our neighbours. Of course, India has been trying to invest here in coal mines, particularly the Adani coal mine. They want that coal to help lift India out of energy poverty, bring electricity to where it isn't at the moment, among other things. Now, the Green groups have been trying to stop the Adani mine in Queensland and also the Alpha mine. In fact, the latest legal bid to stop that $6 billion Alpha mine, a bid by the conservation group Coast and Country, was dismissed just this week. Can you just tell me what signals is all this green legal activity to stop coal mines, to close down coal-fired generators, what is it sending to investors around the world?
It's the most, this is a question that is frequently raised in East Asia. The rise of activism and their ability within our legal system to game those approvals, time after time. Even I think the Queensland Resources Minister recently said, activists are entitled to their day in court, but they're not entitled to their 4 years in court. And unless we've got to address this, unless we do, there won't be any new investment in coal. They've killed off in Victoria gas exploration. The government did that, and we've now got a moratorium on gas exploration in the Northern Territory. I think we are, maybe this is the moment where people recognise the importance that we ought to place on energy security, reliable energy, 24-hour energy. That's not to say that there's no place for renewables. There will be in an energy mix in the future. But I think we might have lost our bearings for a moment or two.
Well, I think almost a decade or two, I'm afraid, Brendan. Brendan Pearson, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew.